Hello, and welcome back to Quarks and Quarter Notes. Today we have a guest, Jakin Cordova. He is an Austin filmmaker, and we're going to be talking about filmmaking as well as how it relates to science, philosophy, and music. This discussion does have some minor spoilers for the Marvel and Star Wars films, as well as the movie About Time. So if you're planning on watching those, I would recommend watching them before listening to this discussion, as it will also help inform you. Once again, thank you so much for joining us today, Jakin. Could you give us like a brief little bio about yourself?
So essentially, my resume of school is I'm a mechanical engineering major, a business minor, and then I have a certificate in Cortex and Ideas. Um, I say like philosophy minor because it's easier to explain. Cortex and Ideas is like philosophy and government and religion. It's like several things. It's the same amount of credits as a minor. I don't know why they don't call it a minor, but all of those things. I've also been like a musician growing up, playing guitar and bass clarinet and stuff like that. And yeah, I do filmmaking on the side. I've been doing it as a part of Texas Student Television, which is a student org at UT, since my freshman year. And since then, I worked on several shows my freshman year. Sophomore year, I started producing a show. Didn't do anything junior year, and now I'm making a new show that I've created my senior year. It's called To Die For, sort of a thriller comedy about a hitman looking for love. So that should be fun. We start shooting tomorrow. So there's been a lot of build up and work going into that, and there will be a premiere in May.
Very cool. That's a lot of different, very different
Yep.
things.
Quite the CV.
The topics of your podcast, you were like, oh, music and philosophy and engineering, and like you
Yeah.
will talk about filmmaking. I'm like, oh, it's like all of the things I do. Yeah.
Yeah, our goal was to kind of capture everything we're interested in, and we felt like those kind of
Yeah.
captured everything. So
Mhm.
it is interesting how these things overlap. A lot of people don't think they do. I started in
Yeah.
accounting and then moved to music, which, like you said, business. And a lot of people are like, "What? You're a guitar player and you're an accountant? Those don't go hand in hand." But
Mhm.
I feel like people really underestimate the overlap.
Yeah, exactly.
So were you into filmmaking like before college or?
Yeah, I started becoming interested in filmmaking like my senior year of high school, like right before I graduated, which at that point I'd already been accepted to UT for engineering. So I briefly considered switching majors, but like you don't need a degree to go into film, but you do need a degree to go into engineering. So I'd kind of rather get the degree in that, and I've still been able to do like a bunch of filmmaking stuff and a bunch of engineering stuff. Like it's worked out pretty well both ways. Like last semester, I had an internship at this place that makes server cabinets. So I was able to design server cabinets for 6 months, and now I'm back to school. But like during that time, like I was able to make money from that and like put that money towards my show. And like outside of that, I didn't have homework or anything, so I would just work on my show. So that worked out pretty well.
So a filmmaker who doesn't want to be poor.
Mhm.
That's smart.
Right.
I had a similar revelation. I went to school for about 3 years for accounting,
Mhm.
and then I switched to music for about 3 years. And I was in the middle of changing colleges. I was going to finish my music degree, and then I was like, I don't need a degree to play music.
So, do you think your engineering degree, what they're teaching you over there, do you think that helps with filmmaking at all?
Yeah, definitely there's like parts where it comes up, but more it's just like I kind of have like an engineering brain for film. Like one of the biggest things they like test you on before you go into engineering is like, do you have good 3D spatialization skills? So like, can you picture 3D objects in your head and like rotate them and stuff? And that's really come in handy because like in directing, so like you need to plan all of these shots in 3D. Like I've been making a bunch of storyboards for my show, and like some of them are like I'll draw what you would see in the final like picture, like the final frame. And sometimes I'll draw like overhead diagrams, like this person is going to move here, this camera is going to move here, and that way. And so I really need that 3D spatialization like
Right.
skills for that. And also like so films are shot in 3D, like you have to like we are in 3D. And
As
then
far as we know right now.
yeah, and then the final product has to be in 2D. And so like I think that's something that a lot of people don't really think about is like where something is on the screen. Like that's something I always think about in my editing. Like I make these highlight videos for my brother's lacrosse team, and like from cut to cut, I try to make it as smooth as possible by like wherever your eye is looking at the end of one cut, that's where I want your eye to be at the start of the next cut. Like let's say someone makes takes a shot and they go from screen right to screen left, then I want the next cut to start screen left, so that your eyes aren't jumping all over the place. Like that's something that a lot of people probably don't think about, but definitely really helps your editing skills. And then just a bunch of like technical aspects of filmmaking I think about a lot, like frame rate and like shutter speed and like visual effects stuff and like aspect ratios. A bunch of that stuff I just think way too much about, like more than the average filmmaker, I think.
Well, it's
Yeah.
it's very similar to music in that regard because you have people who like really break down the music theory and stuff, but then you have other people who just kind of have a feel for it, but they don't really know the mechanics, and you can approach it either way.
And I'm sure all of the technical stuff too, like your audio recording and your software and all that stuff, you might be more interested in if you're an engineer.
Right.
Yeah.
One thing I want to go back to that you said there is, as you talked about how you record in 3D, but then it's presented in 2D.
Mhm.
It's a weird thing because we seem to experience the world in 3D, but our vision itself is also 2D, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we have stereo vision, which kind of helps us see the depth and things like that, but still, like as an experience, it is two-dimensional.
Mhm.
So would you say when you're doing a film like that, you're trying to mimic the same sort of processing that goes on to our brain, making the 3D world into a 2D image and making it seem 3D? Or I don't know if you've thought about that at all.
I mean, kind of like you can definitely shoot in like a naturalistic style. Like some people shoot really naturalistically. Like I know Christopher Nolan only, for the most part, only uses like focal lengths of lens that are like very similar to what human vision is. And then like some people try to shoot like handheld only, but like it's weird. Like you think handheld is kind of like more what our vision is like, but it's not, because like when you walk around, like your eyes do a lot of stabilization
Yeah.
for you. Like it's much smoother than if you're like handheld with the camera. Handheld with the camera can be really shaky, and like people definitely complain about that in movies. Like
Right.
if your action scenes are too shaky. Also, like the concept of an edit is weird. We don't have editing in real life, not really.
Yeah.
So like you blink and like you dream and so like yeah, there's this book called In the Blink of an Eye by Walter Murch that I read my first weekend I got to UT. And that kind of goes over like dreaming is like the closest thing we have to films in our real life. And so I think that's what editing helps with. There's a bunch of like weird science that goes into editing. Like if I take a cut, let's say I have one shot that's like direct onto me, and then if I cut to the next shot and it's a 2-degree difference, like an angle between the two shots, it'll really mess you up. Like it's weird. But if it's more than I think like 35 degrees or something like that, then like we accept it. Like if it's like from the side, if I cut from like a front to the side, then like that's fine for our brains. But if it's like too little movement between cuts, then that really messes us
Right.
up. Yeah.
We're trying to like restitch that picture or whatever, and it's just like slightly off rather than making like a whole new picture.
Uh-huh.
I think one reason that sort of moving thing might not match on well is because our eyes don't really do that at all. You see this, and then while your eyes are moving, they're not actually capturing data. Your brain fills in the gaps, but like there's no continuous movement going on, and that's interesting. Do you think that cutting thing is maybe because whenever it's a slight cut, you can sort of tell it's a cut? You can maybe see some of the not continuities between the two things, and maybe when it's a larger cut, it's harder to spot those differences, or is there something else?
Yeah, I think it's probably that, but also something Walter Murch talked about is that like for the most part, editing should be invisible. Like most people don't think about or see editing. There was this like experiment they did where like it was an experiment he proposed. He didn't actually do it, I don't think, but like essentially cuts should be happening whenever the actors are blinking, and that should sync up with when the audience is blinking. So like not every time, but for the most part, like the audience blinks when cuts happen. Like it should be like at the natural times when you would blink, because like blinking is weird. Like you can hold your eyes open for like longer than you would think if you're like focused on something, but also like you can blink more often if you need to. I think like film kind of goes with that of making you blink when there's a cut. So like you don't really think about it, but if you blink when there's a cut, the cut probably makes more sense to your brain. And yeah, if you blink when it's only a slight angle change, then maybe it feels more like somebody shifted you slightly and that makes you uncomfortable. And you can definitely break rules in filmmaking to make people uncomfortable. But you don't want to be doing that on accident, right?
Right, yeah, intentional. Like in music, you can play like a wrong note, but if it's very intentional, then it's a right note. Jazz music does that a lot, but
Yeah.
very interesting. I had no idea. I didn't know about the blinking thing. That was sort of a thing people aim for. That's very interesting.
Yeah, they would say the best editing is the ones you don't notice, right?
Yeah, which can make it difficult for like editing Oscars. Like oftentimes the Oscar for best editing goes to like whoever did the most noticeable editing
Mhm.
versus
Right.
like the best editing. Yeah.
Like the best editors, you probably don't even know their names.
Yeah.
Again, another music analogy. You have like bass players or something. Like the best ones, you don't even notice them because they're
Mhm.
or you said you did bass clarinet or something, right? Or
Bass clarinet, yeah.
that's another instrument where being subtle is much more powerful.
You notice it when it's gone, that's for sure.
Oh yeah, you notice the absence, but you don't notice the presence.
We looked at your YouTube channel. You have like a whole bunch of these video essays and stuff that you do, and you said you're working on this TV show that you're starts about recording soon. Are there any like whenever you're looking at filmmaking and writing and all this, are there any like universal principles that apply to making films, regardless of if it's long form or short form?
Well, I think all of filmmaking is all about just communicating and expressing your ideas clearly. I think some people might disagree with that. Like, you don't need to understand everything. Like, you can definitely overanalyze a movie. And like, I
Right.
definitely analyze stuff on my channel. Like, if the audience doesn't get your movie at all, I think you failed. One thing I've struggled with in my show is like, I'll make my messages too clear. And then my producing partner, Kaylee, like, she's going over the scripts with me and she's like, no, let's like put this more into the subtext and like let's not have the characters say what they feel. That can be the worst for stuff if the characters say exactly what they're thinking and exactly what they're feeling. You want to communicate the ideas you want to communicate the best you can.
As simply as possible.
Yeah, as simply as possible, but also like doing that through characters is really different from doing that through like a video essay. Like a video essay I can say like, oh, like this person did this thing in this way, but with characters they have to like it has to be believable, it has to be natural, like, it has to be what this character would do, and, like, what I'm doing with the story is how I express my ideas. You can, like, punish and reward different actions in the story. I don't know, it's just a lot to try to communicate what you're saying clearly, but also, like, not act like your audience is dumb.
Right.
Like, you definitely want your audience to be able to interpret stuff, and so it's hard to know where that line is exactly of, like, I don't wanna, like give my audience everything, but I also don't want it to be unclear because like stuff can definitely be unclear to an audience even if you're saying it almost exactly. Like I think this happened with Squid Game, which was kind of about like how capitalism sucks, and the creator like has said that directly, and people still don't think that Squid Game is a metaphor for capitalism sucking.
Really,
Yeah.
I found that so obvious. I
Uh-huh.
thought I thought they were quite blatant with that. Actually, that's
Yeah, they're
interesting.
they're pretty blatant about it, and the creator has said it explicitly, like in interviews, and then people still think you're reading too much into it on the internet I've seen. And like similar thing with the movie Don't Look Up. That
That was very
was
heavy-handed.
was pretty heavy-handed and like very intentionally by the filmmakers about climate change. But it was weird, like when I watched it with my parents, I didn't even think about climate change. I was thinking more about COVID, which I
Yeah.
like was definitely more on our minds because it's more recent.
Right.
But like most people I've seen, I don't really think it's sparked a conversation about climate change. It's kind of sparked a conversation about like, yeah, we're kind of all dumb, right?
There
Yeah,
are definitely parallels between the situations,
yeah, yeah.
and they're divisive across probably about the same axis, you would imagine.
Mhm.
So I see why people make that connection. I did find that movie pretty heavy-handed. That's interesting that you mentioned Squid Game because I thought it felt heavy-handed. Like I felt like they should have explained a little bit less, but if people are generally getting confused, then I guess
Yeah,
maybe
so that's why I
that's
always
real.
struggle with like, should I be more explicit with this idea or should I be less explicit? Because like, if I'm too explicit, I might lose some of my audience. If I'm not explicit enough, like I don't even know with some audiences like if you can be explicit enough because like they might still does not get it. My brother hates it when me and my dad overanalyze movies because he just watches the movie. He's like,
He just wants to
"Yeah,
like
that
it.
was a good movie,"
Yeah.
and then like doesn't think more about it. And apparently, like there's other people who think that way too. I can never think that way. I
Yeah.
am always constantly thinking about like the themes and the writing and the direction and the editing and the visual
And
effects
the
and
score.
And the score, yes, I think about the score
Oh.
so much. Yeah.
Good scores can make or break the movie. I have the same experience because I also like analyzing movies a lot, and I honestly feel bad about it sometimes because I'm with someone who just wants to enjoy it without thinking about it. I've gotten a little bit better at that over the years, but I know how I feel, and I've been on both sides of that. Where I'm watching the movie, I'm like, this doesn't make any sense, and then I've been watching, I'm like, shut up and just do the thing. It's obvious. You didn't need to say that. At the end of the most recent Star Wars, like The Last Jedi, they were like, "What's your name?" You know what? See, I'm talking about the very end, and she's like,
or
Skywalker.
Rise of Skywalker, right?
Yeah, and I was like, "Don't say Skywalker. Don't say Skywalker."
I know. Yeah.
Okay.
Same with when Han Solo gets his name in Solo. Like,
don't say it. Sometimes it's earned, you know. We've talked about superhero movies. I know in the Avengers, you have like this tagline for Captain America, like Avengers Assemble, and they sort of tease it over many, many, many movies, and then they finally do it at the very last one after like 12 movies. Okay, you earned that.
Yeah. The issue with that delivery though, he like whispered Assemble. And like because my theater was so loud, I could not hear him say that. I had no idea that he said that until like afterwards. Yeah.
And by the way, I watched several of those video essays. I really enjoyed them. Very high quality. I watched the Justice League VFX and physics one that was incredibly interesting, and then also the Christopher Nolan one, who's a director, of course.
Yeah.
We talked about already before, as you know, Interstellar has some really interesting high quality physics in it. I guess on the same tangent of giving audience credit and explaining things, I've always loved filmmaking as a tool for distilling philosophy to general audience. You have like basic kids movies and such that will teach like very basic moral fables, like Aesop's fables level of things, where like be good to your neighbor, love your family, things like that, really basic things. And then you have more complex ideas. One of my favorites is in the Avengers, again, bringing it back to I love the Avengers. It's a whole lot of fun. I love superhero movies. I look at them like the Greek gods of modern day almost. So Captain America and Iron Man, for example, they represent Captain America's like the good Kantian deontologist. The action is right or wrong at the action, not the consequences. And then Iron Man's this kind of consequentialist. You can trade lives for the greater good sort of thing. And there's a lot of conflict there. And I feel like they really distill thousands of years of philosophy arguments into like a few movies. And that's pretty interesting. What are your thoughts on some of that?
Yeah, like you can definitely like bring philosophy to general audiences if you're doing it in a fun way. And if you look at like the original Matrix versus the sequels, like all of them are doing like advanced philosophy stuff and very explicitly referencing philosophy. And those are movies that are taught in philosophy classes. But like the first Matrix does it in a way that's super interesting, and then the rest don't as much.
Right.
Yeah. And like you can definitely like teach philosophy to general audiences. And like I think every film has a moral, whether it's intentional or not, which is why I think you should be intentional about it, because like otherwise if you're unintentional about it, like that can be bad. But like even as basic as just like good versus evil, like every film teaches you something, and like there's like stuff you can learn or like stuff you will learn unintentionally. Like I think like one thing I always forget is like when you're born, you don't automatically know stuff. Like you learn stuff from the things around you. And like there's some stuff you can figure out through like intuition, but like you can learn more from your intuition if you like have more of a knowledge base, right? So like when we teach things in movies, like even unintentionally, like people pick up on that. Even if you know, like, oh, like this is a fictional movie, it's not real. You assume that it's based on some amount of truth. The way I don't know, like we portray like New York in movies, like people assume things about New York based on movies, and then you get there, and then you're like, oh, those were accurate, or like, oh, those weren't accurate, and like you know that those movies weren't real, but you still like learn stuff from them, and that goes for like I think like lots of cultures and lots of ideas, and like I know that's something you wanted to get into later, and I'm jumping ahead a little bit. Like science and engineering ideas, like people assume that like this science is real or that we can do this thing, but no, like that was just in a movie. Like
Yep, that's Hollywood.
yeah. If you ask people what they think about a topic that they haven't researched, they haven't like studied about, they'll probably tell you what they learned from movies. Yeah, they know that it's fictional, but they also like assume it's based on some aspect of reality, which is like kind of good. Like there are definitely like TV shows and movies that like do their research and like will show you like the real thing, but like most movies aren't like that. And I think more movies should be doing their research, because people will think that it's real.
That's a great argument for because some people like they take the research really seriously. They want to make things really accurate, and some people
Mhm.
think it's not important. We're just having fun. But that's actually a really good point because people do draw from this. Even in movies, you'll have like offhand lines about, "Oh yeah, I've seen a lot of these movies, so I know how to do this." You know,
Yeah.
it's
Right.
kind of a
Uh-huh.
trope.
Yeah, I can't tell you how many people I've heard take Interstellar as like a space textbook, right? And then they just like make claims because they saw it. And like you said, Christopher Nolan, he's the director for that movie, right? He likes getting the science mostly correct, and then he'll bend it. He says he bends it where he needs it, but you can't take everything in a movie as true fact.
No, there's definitely things you need to bend just about like reality itself that make it more like it's like films are like cutting the boring parts out of life essentially, and like yeah, once you like start making stuff, I don't know if you guys have made films, but like there's things you realize like, oh, I probably shouldn't have this person like walking from this location to this location, like that would be boring, or like I should film it in like an interesting way. In the movie Hot Fuzz, when he gets, I think he's like based in London and he has to go to the small town, and they show the train ride to there, but like he keeps getting like woken up, and there's like interesting cuts and like comedy stuff going on there, and like that makes it interesting. That's something that Breaking Bad does really well, is like whenever something is um like story or character based, then they film it in like a very simple way. Like it'll just be like two cameras, the back and forth coverage of like a person arguing. But whenever it's like something that is like a boring or repetitive task, like when they're like making the meth and stuff, and they'll film it in like the hyper labs, they'll do like really interesting angles and cuts and stuff. But when you need to focus on the story, then the filmmaking is simpler.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I love that about Breaking Bad.
Mhm.
That's probably my number one show of all time, honestly. I never have heard someone actually like explain that, but I know what you're talking about as you're saying it. I can think back to those scenes and stuff, but I never really actually unpacked that. So that's really interesting. There's this one director, he's very popular, but he'll do these sorts of cut to the coffee pouring, cut to the thing, cut to the and it's a series of like very short cuts of like someone getting ready in the morning. Do you know
Mhm.
who I'm talking about?
Probably Edgar Wright.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, Edgar Wright.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's
Mhm.
another interesting way of doing that sort of thing.
Edgar Wright's interesting. I heard him give this one interview where he talked about like the action scenes, like he highly choreographs those and like plans it out exactly. And then when it's just like a scene between two actors, then he like rehearsed with the actors first before he starts planning the shots. And so like that's what I'm gonna do with this one sequence in my show, is like there's like a long scene between these two actors, and like I want to let them be able to like walk around, and I want to support their performance as much as possible with the filmmaking instead of like planning making them plan their acting around the
Yeah.
shots. But when it's more action stuff and it's less acting, then I'll have to like plan the shots more intensely.
How much freedom does an actor have? When they go in, they're given what they're told to do and how to move, or how does that work?
I think it really depends on like the writer and the director. Like sometimes you're doing stuff exactly as the director tells you. Sometimes like you can work on the blocking of it together and then plan the shot around that. I know David Fincher like likes to have his camera movements synced with the actors. And so I'm not sure if that's like he plans the camera movements first or he has the actors do it first. Once you've decided on a performance, then you kind of have to do it the same way every time, unless you're like unless you have multiple cameras going and you're able to like do lots of improv. Like that's one thing that's a little hard because like the first show I did at TSTV was a comedy, and so I'd want more improv and stuff, right? But like it has to match. If you're doing coverage of one person, like say you're filming a conversation between two people, and we only had one camera, so if you're doing the coverage of one person and you do the coverage of the other person, they kind of have to match up. Because otherwise, if you're doing it editing and it's two completely different performances, then it'll look really weird. Yeah. Also, like if someone's like moving their hand in the center and like one take, and then they have their hand like all the way to the right in another take, then that doesn't match up, and so you kind of have to cut around that, make sure that's not throwing you off, because like that will throw you off as an audience.
I've definitely noticed in some mistakes, I guess you could say, where they'll have their arms crossed and then it'll like cut from their far away and then their arms will be down at their side or something. And it's just like, whoa, okay.
Well, let's move on to science. So we've already talked about some reasons that you would want to get the science and stuff right. Where does that level hit for you? Like, do you want to be 100%? Do you want to be 80%? Are you
Yeah.
aligned with Nolan on this? Or
Yeah, I think it just depends on the movie and your expectations going into it. Like Star Wars, I don't really expect them to get the science right. Whenever they have space battles and then like they're like shooting bombs, right? And the bombs are like the bombs are like going down because of gravity, but like they're in space,
Yep.
like the gravity's all off. Like
You can see
don't
the
know, like-
pulses of light.
yeah,
Like travel.
uh-huh. Like you don't want to lose your audience. Like you don't want to do something that's like clearly not scientifically possible. But like there's a bunch of like sci-fi conventions that we just kind of accept now and that like help with stuff.
Sounds in space.
Yeah, sound in space, going to hyperspace or like
Right.
going light speed, like that just helps with like if you have a bunch of planets and you need to travel quickly between them. Because otherwise if you don't have that rule, then you have to do fast travel like in Game of Thrones in the last seasons, right? Like and it just makes no
There's
sense.
cuts in there.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I guess
so-
we're here now.
Yeah, because like with any like film or show, like you want to follow your own rules. Like that's what people get upset the most about for plot holes. Like is when the movie doesn't follow its own rules that it set up. Yeah, you definitely want to keep that consistent throughout. It doesn't matter if the rules are ridiculous.
Right.
If you can like follow all the rules, then I think people will go along with it. But yeah, I do still want like some level of realism. You guys saw my like Flash video, but like that was like such a cool way to bring in like elements of physics that were real without like I'm sure it
Well,
wasn't like
for those who haven't seen it, would you like
Yeah.
to just briefly?
yeah, so like in Justice League and Zack Snyder's Justice League, like both versions of the movie, the way they did the Flash's visual effects was like really different from any way that you've seen like speedsters or like people who can go fast in movies before. First of all, the air seemed more like a liquid. Like it seemed like it kind of looked like he was underwater. And that's because like air is a fluid and like the faster you go, the more air resistance you get. And so you'll get like pushback from the air. And that's something that's really important, like the design of cars and airplanes and stuff like that. And so like that was really cool that they did that. They also had like you could see like little rainbows across the screen sometimes, and I think that was a show that he was going like almost as fast as the visible spectrum of light, and then like his shoes would break and the ground would break which below him because like force is mass times acceleration. If you crank the acceleration way up, you're
Right.
gonna crank
It's a
the,
huge
you're gonna crank
force,
the
yeah.
force way up.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so like someone going that fast would have to be like super powerful because of that.
Right.
And then like something that they did to combat that a little bit was like the way that the Flash runs in that movie. It's kind of like he's like a figure skater or something like that. Like he's trying not to put as much force onto the ground to not like completely break his feet in the ground every time he runs. It's also based on there are these monks in Asia, I think, that Ezra Miller I drew inspiration from that like they ran in this weird gait that like helped them run faster. So like not only was the Flash going fast because of his power, he was also maximizing the way that he ran to go even faster, which I thought was cool. But also it looked kind of goofy. So like yeah, there were some complaints about that. Like, why is the Flash running weird? It's because of this cool reason, but it looks kind of weird.
But at the same time, you don't
yeah.
want a scene of him sitting there saying, "Oh yeah, I went and studied with monks and learned the right way to run."
Yeah. Yeah, but there's also a scene in Zack Snyder's Justice League where he's like meditating a little bit before battle, which I heard was also like Ezra Miller pulling another thing from the monks. Yeah.
Well, I guess if you have someone like Flash, if he sort of like existed IRL, right, and
Mhm.
we wouldn't see him run. He would just like be at one
No.
spot, and then we would see him at the other spot. And
Uh-huh.
so whenever you're doing a film, you have to like when you slow it down, you have to make up what it's gonna look like, right?
Yeah, because like one issue you have with slow motion is it's only so much light, and so like when you do a scene in slow motion, like in real life, I know they do stuff with like VFX.
Yeah.
in Justice League. You only have so much light, and so you need to increase your shutter speed if you want to increase your frame rate. So that way you can get more frames, that way you can slow it down in post. As you increase your shutter speed, then like you're only letting light into your camera for like tiny fractions of a second. And also, like, you can't have someone going faster than the speed of light. Like, that wouldn't make sense. Like,
You couldn't
for
record
capturing
that.
it on a camera. Yeah, and so I think like that was like what I said about like the rainbow is like you're seeing that the flash is almost going as fast as the visible spectrum, which means that you can still record him, right? Because special relativity stuff, like
Hmm.
the speed of light is constant, and so that's why you have time dilation and length contraction, is because like the speed of light has to remain constant. Minute Physics is this great YouTube channel I like that has like some stuff that explains this, and they even made like a time dilation graph thing that was like 3D printed or something like that you can like plot several points, then you can see how much time dilation there would be versus length contraction. For anyone who doesn't know, like as you approach the speed of light, time slows down exponentially as you approach it. Length also changes too because of that, because you have to have speed of light be constant. So like
Yeah, we
Yeah.
talked a lot about general and special relativity. I
Uh-huh.
think the thought experiment we used was the light clock having the beam going up and down, and then as you go closer, it has to travel farther, and that sort of demonstrates it. But that's one of my favorite concepts to use to see in movies for sure.
Right.
Yeah, and like you can definitely use it in a way that benefits the story. Like Interstellar, they were
Best
able to
example.
use time dilation to show Matthew McConaughey has to miss out on his kids growing up, and then he has to watch them grow up in that like really emotional scene. When you can combine science with like dramatic storytelling, then I think that's when you get the best results. Versus like Tenet, which like didn't really do that. So yeah.
Yeah, that was one of the few movies I actually left early because I was just like, although part of that was the sound engineering because I couldn't really hear. I don't know.
Yeah.
Did you have this experience where like you couldn't really hear the dialogue?
I watched it at home,
Okay.
so I think I was able to turn on subtitles. I don't remember what I did, but
Yeah.
yeah, I need to watch that movie again. I heard like if once you watch it like 3 times, you understand. So yeah, I don't know.
Man, that seems kind of rough though.
Mhm.
Making a film that takes several times to get it. I guess it could be a good thing, but it
I
seems
don't
kind
know.
of rough.
To me, that's something like acquired taste wine or something. This just tastes
Mhm.
bad, and you're making yourself
Yeah.
like it. I don't know.
No.
Yeah.
I think ideal movie is you watch the first time and you're like, yeah, that was awesome, and then you
Mhm.
watch the second time and you like get more from it, and like
Yeah.
you can do that with each time. I mean, to a limit, right? Yeah.
For some, well, I don't know about films, but I know for books, sometimes I can. Dune, for example,
Mhm.
I started reading those when I was maybe 11 or 12, and of
Mhm.
course, when you read a book like that, you don't get everything you can get out of it at 10 or 12. And
Yeah.
then I read it again as like a teenager, and then read it again as an
Mhm.
adult, and I've maybe read it 8 or 9 times at this point, and I feel like every single time I've gotten more. I think Frank Herbert, he suggested that you should take basic science principles that work, and then
Mhm.
just like stretch them to the extremes while like
Yeah.
maintaining those principles.
Yeah. Well, Dune is an interesting example because didn't Frank Herbert really study, I think, ecology and like what the ecosystem would be on Arrakis in the desert, right?
Yeah,
Like,
he was
yeah.
inspired. They were doing some desert control, I think, in Arizona along one of the highways, and they were putting plants down to sort of control the movement of the sand,
Mhm.
because sand moves like a fluid,
Yeah.
and that sort of inspired him. And yeah, he dove deep into that. But
Mhm.
even all the other principles that are more magical, like the voice, being able to
Uh-huh.
control someone with your voice, it's the idea that I can say something to you right now and make you do something.
Yeah.
And in some ways, you're sort of helpless to not do it. Like I could make you think
Mhm.
of something, or even I could be like, "Oh, hey, could you please hand me that glass?" And you would hand it to me.
Mhm.
And you're just taking that idea and going crazy with it. Like, how much could you influence someone with your voice?
Yeah. Yeah.
Interesting.
Like, I think that's what film does best, is like when you kind of exaggerate concepts so you can like understand them better, and also when you operate on a metaphorical level with concept. If you can approach something as a metaphor, then you can kind of like deconstruct it in a way that you wouldn't be able to if it was just like the original thing.
Can you give me an
Yeah.
example to sort of clarify that in my head?
Don't Look Up is like a not as great of an example, but like you're talking about like the comet or the meteor as a metaphor for climate change. And so you can kind of, so they talk about it in that way. So you don't, it's not explicitly climate change, but you're like, it's something that's going to kill us, and like we need our government to stop it, and they're not. And so like you can kind of operate on that level with it, because like then you can say like it's a meteor, it will for sure kill us, it's coming, we have evidence of it. Versus like climate change, people already believe or don't believe in climate change for the most
Right.
part.
So there's clearly a spectrum between movies that like get this really right and get this really wrong. Tyler, you said you don't like how people try to get all their science from Interstellar, but surely you prefer that to
Right.
Star Wars, right? If you had to pick.
Well, the thing is, like, it's just the so Interstellar, when it came out, it was praised heavily for getting a lot of science right, right, and then people take that as Interstellar got all the science right, whereas like Star Wars, nobody expects Star Wars to have gotten the science right. Like it wasn't there from the beginning, an expectation. Right. And that's my only beef, if that's what you want to call it. I'm all for like bending the rules, and I can suspend my own disbelief, but it's just whenever people take that like
To the real world.
right, it's like that's this is what happens.
Well, no one might consciously go in with the expectation that Star Wars, but as Jakin mentioned earlier, people sort of tacitly, I guess, maybe.
Yeah.
I mean, whenever we're sitting there in the theaters or something, I mean, we're looking at something that looks pretty real life, and so it's hard to fully push that away from reality, right? To understand that
Yeah.
it's not here.
That's actually interesting. We look at, or I do. I don't remember if Tyler agreed with me on this, but look at music as like a super stimulus of sort of basic instincts we have. The ability to recognize speech and different types of sounds, and music sort of super stimulates all these senses. And I feel like film is on an additional level, because not only do you have the super stimulus of music, but you have the super stimulus of looking at people who can't see you and looking them in the eyes for extended periods of time that you would never do. It's a very weird experience.
Not like normal people too. When we're looking at like superheroes, we're looking at like godlike creatures. That in itself is like exciting, and that's like at bottom of being a human is thinking of heroes and gods and stuff of that sorts, right?
Yeah.
I do wonder how the psychology of us modern day humans who watch films would differ from if we didn't have that, because it really is. I can't think of many things that are more weird outside of our experience.
Well, I still think it's most similar to dreaming.
Yeah.
Like you're like in a dark room, you're having this like surreal experience, and you like know it's not real, but it also feels real. Like that's kind of what dreams are. You can watch a movie multiple times, and my dreams are definitely less like tangible than
Yeah.
movies, right?
Well, it's like you have an experience. Like right now, we're sort of dreaming, but our dream is constrained to the physical world.
Yeah.
When you're dreaming, you're not constrained, and then in a film, it's like you're not constrained, but it's also organized for you in a certain way.
Movies are controlled dreaming.
Yeah,
Exactly. Yeah.
calculated dreaming, like from like a mad scientist who's trying to make your dream a certain way.
Yeah.
That's a weird way of looking at it.
No, I keep thinking about like Plato's allegory of the cave, and like that's kind of like movies a little bit. I wonder like how that happened at the time of like how Plato explained like, oh, people thought shadows on the wall were real, which obviously back then you wouldn't, right? But like now, and whenever I'm sitting in my room on my phone or like in Zoom meetings, I'm like, this is just Plato's allegory of the cave. Like I'm like watching all of these lights that aren't reality, and like yeah, like that's what movies are too, right?
Yeah,
Kind of.
and it's becoming even more and more difficult to tell the difference. And I mean, one day it might be literally indistinguishable, which
Yeah,
we might literally be in Plato's cave at some. Maybe
Yeah.
we are now. I mean,
Yeah. Yeah, because like more and more stuff going online, Zoom meetings, and then like the metaverse. I do not want to do the metaverse. It
No.
sounds terrible. Like
Right.
first of all, for your eyes, it sounds terrible in the eyes. Yeah.
Well, I mean, at some point you might just be able to directly integrate with like the optic nerve, so you don't have to worry about eyes anymore.
Right.
Yeah.
Where we're going, you won't need eyes.
Yeah, I don't really want to do that either. I think this is why we need shows like Black Mirror to just scare the crap out of people
Yeah.
for certain technology. Let's scare people about this technology so that way people don't want to do it. The thing a lots of like engineers I think underestimate about people is that they hate interacting with robots. You can like create a great robot that like will help people, and then people are like, no, I hate talking to robots. Do not robocall me.
It's so
Yeah.
frustrating.
Yeah, do not have me on the phone with like a robot customer service representative. We just hate talking to robots. Yeah.
But what do you do once you have like an AI that is actually over the phone indistinguishable from a human being? I mean, will people still complain, you think?
And if they don't know, maybe. But
I don't know
like,
if you've heard, but a few years ago, Apple released it was like a demo of Siri like booking getting a haircut or something. And they said on the phone, Siri, like, book me this place at 12 on this day or whatever. And we listened to the phone call, and it sounds like a person booking their haircut on this time and this day. And it's, if you didn't know that you're listening to Siri book something, you could definitely be convinced that it was just two people having a conversation. And that was released a few years ago. So at this point, it has to be getting.
I mean,
Pretty
it's not
good.
really a question of if. It's only a question of when. At some point, unless you think technology is going to stop improving, or we're going to put in restrictions that stop technology from improving out of like Black Mirror fear, like
yeah.
it really is just a matter of time. It will get there at some point.
And well, like on that note, like I think there is technology that can keep increasing, but also there are hard limits of math and science. Like engineers will tell you this. Yeah, we can't do infinitely better stuff. There's limits on how effective batteries are and power is, and like you can't make a perpetual motion machine. Like there's certain stuff, technology barriers that you can't get past simply because of physics.
Like if you have a battery that's 2 centimeters by 2 centimeters, there's only so much energy you can put in that much space.
Yeah.
Right.
Or no matter how efficient your solar panel is, there's only so much energy actually coming from the sun. But
Right.
that's not really the issue. There's plenty of energy coming from the sun, right?
well, like if you have a 1 foot by 1 foot solar
Yeah.
panel, even if it's like 100% efficient,
There
is like a cap on that energy that's very distinct.
Yeah.
That's all I mean. I mean, I know our solar panels can go a long way from where they are now.
Yeah.
But the caps imposed on us by physics, they seem quite high. It wasn't long ago that we didn't think that flight was possible with technology.
Mhm.
And then once we had flight, we didn't think we'd ever be able to like go across the ocean, and now we've gone to space. Would you say you're of the mind that you think that like technology will probably stop improving before we have AI that's indistinguishable? Or
Yeah, I don't know if that's one of the things that has like a hard limit on it from physics, but like I'm just saying like all technology cannot infinitely improve forever.
right.
Like there's definitely
Exponentially.
exponentially. The past 100 years we've had exponential growth for sure. It can't keep going that way forever because of these hard limits. And like, yeah, they might be high, but like we'll eventually hit them.
Yeah. Well, given that I can simulate a human conversation with you on my meat computer.
Yeah. And
Sure.
and there's definitely like social scripts that we follow that
Yeah.
I'm sure we'd eventually be able to have a computer follow as well. Like we say like, "Hello, how are you? Like nice to meet you." Like
Yeah. Or we say when we're thinking sometimes.
Yeah.
AI is always fun to talk about. I think that is a good point, the hard cap on like how fast technology like could improve, like in principle, like when we think of exponential growth, if we take it seriously, right? And we think of like how our computers have been getting better and better every year, right? If we take exponential growth seriously, we're claiming that eventually every day we're going to have a computer that's twice as good as the computer was the day before, right? And it's like we know that's not reasonable even in principle. But like exponential growth underneath it makes that claim that eventually you're going to get to this point where it's doing that.
Well, I don't think you need exponential growth. You just need growth of any kind over any speed, even if it's incredibly slow.
Yeah.
You give it enough time. This slides into a slightly interesting question that I'd like to hear your thoughts on. So I'm of the mind that technology probably will keep improving, even if it does like slow down considerably, and eventually we will have AI. I view music in a way to where I don't see any reason an AI couldn't do it, because I'm just following certain patterns and certain scripts to sort of put things together. And I imagine AI might one day compose music that maybe even better than humans can. What do you think about filmmaking? Do you think we'll ever have like completely AI created films? Will
I
they
don't
take your
know.
jobs?
When I think about it for engineering, when I did my designing server cabinets job, we would essentially have the computer do as much as the computer could do, and then we would fix stuff afterwards. So like the computer would generate like these 3D models. Is the server cabinets were like the same model, but then we would have to customize them for customers, like depending on what the customer needed. The computer would make this 3D model of the server cabinet based on what we like click that we want in the server cabinet, and then check it for any issues, and then have to modify it for stuff. So I think it could be a similar thing to that. Maybe an AI makes a movie script or like comes up with a movie idea, and then humans have to fix it so that way it doesn't seem like an AI wrote it.
Right.
Yeah, like take out all the weird stuff that an AI wouldn't know is wrong. And like it could, I'm guessing, help a lot like with animation. Like if you can have AI mimic human movement, and like that'd probably save animators a bunch of time and work. It might also cost them their jobs too.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Well, it's like if we have like a general intelligence, do you think it's just not possible in principle that you could have like an AI, like you wouldn't need a human to humanify it? You could have an AI that actually could direct, it could write, it could simulate all the actors and movements, and or do you think you're always going to
Yeah.
need like a human behind the scenes sort of pushing in?
Yeah, I mean, it would have to be like a fully animated movie. Like maybe the technology would be good enough that way the animated would look like real.
Like metaverse style movie.
Yeah. I don't know. I just think with AI in general, like there's that uncanny valley, right?
Mhm.
It's like the
Mhm.
closer you get, like even if it's slightly off, I think it's the same thing with like I talked about with editing. Like if you're like 2 degrees off from cut to cut, it'll feel weird. I think like the closer we get, the weirder it's gonna feel until we get it exactly right. So like I don't know how long that'll be. Like I am not an expert in AI in any
No,
way.
I know.
Right,
So
none of us are.
yeah. So I don't know like how it would do these
We're
things.
entirely speculating right now, yeah.
Yeah.
That's I hope that's clear to everyone.
Uh-huh.
we're just speculating.
Yeah, and I think even the people who make AI don't always know how
Mm-mm.
it's doing, what it's doing either. But like,
I think they have no idea. I don't know if you listen to Lex Fridman or know who Lex Fridman is.
I've heard of him.
He's a software engineer, works at MIT.
Mhm.
Anyways, he was talking about one of the big problems in AI right now and machine learning. One of the problems is, why does it work so well? Like, we don't even know why it works as well as it does,
Mhm.
which is kind of interesting.
Yeah, I remember there was one video I saw on AI. It might have been Minute Physics or someone else explain how it works. Of like, it's essentially like one program training other programs to do this thing, but then like once the other programs learned how to do it, then you don't really know how those programs know how to do that, right?
Right. It's really
Yeah.
quite weird.
Uh-huh.
It's like, what is it learning? Like, what's going on in there?
Yeah, and it kind of seems like Taylor series or something like advanced differential equations where like
Right.
you can get these equations to approximate another line, but you're like,
And then you
how
get
is
some
it?
equation out of it.
Yeah.
What's actually going on in there? I mean,
Uh-huh.
we in some sense have that problem with our own brain. So
Yeah, we don't know what's going on there, right?
I mean, whenever you do anything, where does anything come from? Like any idea, like
Mhm.
they just sort of come and you.
They're just sort of there.
Yeah.
So maybe those problems are tied in together somehow. I don't know, but it's interesting. Are there anything? Is there anything you guys would like to hit before we conclude? I think we've hit a lot of the interesting things.
I did want to ask, so back to the filmmaking, whenever you're making a filmmaking and you're considering your audience, how much do you expect from your audience?
And I definitely expect them to know genre stuff. That's something that's convenient about like working in a genre is like there's expectations of like this character will kind of do this, like these are the rules of like this type of genre world, right? Like you expect different things from a comedy than a drama, and my show is kind of like leaning more into the thriller drama stuff, but there's definitely comedy, and like whenever it switches to comedy, I think there's just different expectations there. Like I'm trying not to like spoon feed the audience, but like I'm also like giving them all the information they need. Like it's like the way that hitmen work in the world of my show is that they like operate off of an app kind of like Uber. And so what I want to do is like show a character using that app briefly, and then like that's kind of the explanation they get. Like I don't need to have a character saying like hitmen work like Uber in this world and like give a whole speech about it. Yeah.
I've seen a lot of times in movies, the main character gives a spiel of the whole mission and everything, and it's
Uh-huh.
like it's literally telling you exactly what's going to happen, and it seems like sometimes it's not quite necessary. Sometimes it makes sense, but
Or you have like the protege they're explaining to. They're like, "Oh yeah," and then you get your next hit on the app, and they're like, "What? An app?"
Yeah.
right.
But since it's sort of in that thriller sort of section, you just expect people to like, yeah, that's what it is, and you have similar expectations for like thriller tropes.
Yeah.
But if you were to introduce some sort of sci-fi element, you would explain that maybe,
Uh-huh.
unless it was a sci-fi film, and then maybe you wouldn't. Is that sort of what you're getting at?
Yeah, and you kind of have to set expectations from like the first scene of what can happen in this world. You know, like how are you going to portray different stuff that happens? Like if you portray, like if your first scene in the movie is a funeral and everyone's crying, and that's different from like if it's a funeral and everyone's laughing. I don't know.
There are, and maybe you can explain this. There are sort of twists on in the sort of thing that you're saying, because I
Yeah.
have seen almost parody movies, but also other stuff, Cabin in the Woods, or even like a Tarantino film, where like they sort
Yeah.
of set you up with a certain expectation, but then by the end you're just, what is that? How does
Yeah.
that fit into your picture?
Yeah, like that's one of the good things about genre is like you can play with like the expectations and like subvert people's expectations. And like that's definitely something I'm doing in my show, like where it's a thriller comedy. Like sometimes it'll seem like it's gonna be a straight thriller and then like I'll hit you with a comedy thing. Sometimes someone is killed and I'm like trying to play it for laughs and we'll see how successful I am at that. Yeah.
Well, we'll let you know
Yeah.
how well that works.
Whenever you're doing that, whenever say you're like filming a thriller or something and you want to, like you said, subvert expectations, do you have a sense on when it works? Right. I can imagine a case where you're trying to subvert expectation and it doesn't hit right what you're trying to do or something like that. Do you have a sense for that?
Yeah, and one of the tough things about comedy is like, yeah, I can make you laugh, but you don't really know if it makes the audience laugh till like a year later. So like one of the things you have to test is like, does it make other people laugh when they read the script? Like we've done like group reading the script and like I go over it with my producing partner and do the actors think it's funny too? Like,
Right.
yeah, I heard what are their names? Phil Lord and Chris Miller. I listened to an interview with them where they were talking about like they're making an animated movie. So like animated movies, you can like go in and change the jokes later, and
Mhm.
like once they had like started doing test screenings, at that point they'd heard the jokes so many times that they kind of hated them and wanted to
Right.
write new ones.
Yeah.
But the jokes were getting laughs in test screenings, and so like you kind of had to go based on like what the audience found funny there, because like they could no longer tell if it was funny to them because they had heard it a million times.
Right.
And like I'm kind of at that point with my show. I've read the script a million times. I don't really know if it's good or not anymore because it's just it is
Right.
what it is to me. So I need to see what the actors think. Like so far, I've heard good feedback from the actors. Like, oh, like this is well written. Okay, cool. Because I can't tell. Like,
Right.
yeah,
That makes sense.
uh-huh.
Well, when I'm thinking of comedy, like stand-up comedy, for instance, you're right there with the crowd, right? You're getting like immediate feedback
Real-time
and like
feedback.
right, and like
Mhm.
at the end of it or whatever, you can be like, well, that joke didn't quite hit. I need to change that up right now. But with like
Mhm.
filmmaking, you have a huge delay between whenever this goes out to the real audience, right? And do you get that kind of feedback?
Yeah.
Sometimes you have good test screenings, good feedback. All the actors love it. Everyone's happy with it. But then they
Mhm.
put it out to like an audience, and the audience is just like,
Not good.
it's a crazy balancing act.
Yeah, because like also like you have more information than the audience might get.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Like I can explain to the actors like that men work like Uber in this world, but like if the audience doesn't get that from what I show them on screen, then they might not
Right.
understand it as well. Or like I might tell an actor when I'm directing them like, oh, this character is doing this because of this. They might have that in their head when they're performing that scene, but if the audience doesn't get that, yeah.
Until an hour later into the movie. Right.
Mhm.
Yeah. Right. Whenever you're making the film, you know the beginning and you also know the end, right? Whenever
Yeah.
you're watching it, you only
Uh-huh.
know however far you're into the movie, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And that's one of the reasons that sometimes a second viewing can be really nice, because then you can watch the beginning in light of the end, and that sort of informs you a little bit more.
You get to
From the
see.
director's
So I watched Dune twice. We were talking about Dune earlier, and it's really nice. So the first time I saw it, I thought it was awesome, and then the second time I saw it, I thought it was awesome because I could see what they were building up to, right? And I was like, oh, like, and I got excited a second time because I've already seen it, but it's like, oh, I see that reference there. They're not quite there to the movie, but like I get it.
Dune was a beautiful movie. I really enjoyed it, and I enjoyed the music.
Yeah.
I thought they did a great job
The music
portraying it
was
all.
amazing. Like these
Yeah.
big sounds and the great shots.
Yeah, Dune has ruined like all other movies for me in terms of VFX because like everything just looks fake compared to Dune because they integrated VFX so well in
It's
that
so
movie.
gorgeous.
Like,
Yeah, it's so good.
Try watching like the Star Wars prequels after that, and it's just like, what?
no, because like I watched Dune in theaters when it came out,
Mhm.
and then when I saw Spider-Man: Far From Home, I'm like, oh, this looks so much worse than Dune. Like I hadn't even seen Dune in like 2 months,
Yeah,
but I'm
right.
like, this is nothing compared to Dune. Like, yeah, I enjoy Spider-Man a lot, but like, yeah, VFX were not there at the same level, right?
it's like looking at a really pretty painting from like a high school artist versus like a Monet or something. You know, it's there's a pretty big
Right.
discrepancy there.
Yeah.
So speaking of music, and that score was great too, is even better than the 80s Dunes Toto score.
Oh,
What role do you see music playing in movies? And everything from like video essays and does your TV show have music? How are you using
Yeah, we're gonna
sounds?
bring on a composer to do music. Like music, super influential. Like can definitely like change the tone of the scene, like the genre of the scene, like what emotions you're feeling. Like music can definitely manipulate you in those ways. One of the like things I think about a lot in music is leitmotifs. Like there's this great YouTube channel called Sideways that dives into leitmotifs and like different stuff in movies. And like I'm always thinking about like what is the character's theme. A leitmotif is a musical idea as like the shortest amount. It could just be even like 2 notes. And through film, if you play that leitmotif every time like a certain action happens, you associate that with that idea. Like in the Sam Raimi Spider-Man movies, there's like a couple of notes that represent responsibility. So anytime like Spider-Man is faced with important responsibility, then you hear those couple of notes. You can use this really effectively. And if you combine stuff, then you can do that really well. You can definitely overdo it, like in the movie Zack Snyder's Justice League. Every time Wonder Woman does anything, then you
Oh
get
my
that
God.
woman singing, and it becomes annoying very quickly. I just started laughing at a certain point when I heard that like over and over again. Yeah, like 'cause you don't want to overdo it. You can definitely bring stuff back. Like Marvel started to bring stuff back, like because they used to bring on a different composer for every movie. Like each Iron Man movie has a different composer and a different theme for each movie. And yeah, like the character's main theme is different from like a leitmotif because the leitmotif is like the smallest possible thing. It's like a theme can be composed of like a bunch of different leitmotifs. Like one thing that was interesting about Rey's theme in the Star Wars movies, when they first made her theme, like they didn't really know where they were going with the character. And so like her theme could be combined with a bunch of different Star Wars themes in the future. So like if you wanted to combine her theme with like Vader's theme, it could be done very easily. But they didn't know if they were going to go that route. So
Yeah.
like that's just really smart on John Williams' part that he was able to like make a theme that could be combined into all these other themes. Like I think part of Ray's theme was another theme backwards, just like something like that.
Yeah.
Like Sideways has a video explaining that really well. But yeah, I definitely want leitmotifs for like the different ideas I'm going for in my show, different character moments. Because like even if you're not thinking about it, it definitely has like a subconscious effect on you.
Oh yeah, definitely. As soon as you said the Sam Raimi movies, I couldn't even pull the theme to my head, but I can remember those like moments,
Yeah.
those like big decision making moments where the theme comes on, and it's just like you don't even have to think about it, but there's just something that pulls you, you know.
Yeah, like music and film too. Like there's just something like visceral, like in your gut that you feel from them that you don't get from if you're just like talking about an idea. To go off a little bit, like the movie About Time is really great. I don't know if you guys. It's kind of like a time travel romantic comedy that's explaining it badly, but like essentially this guy learns that he can travel through time a little bit, but he doesn't go to like dinosaurs or anything. He just uses it kind of to fix his own life. but then at the end of the movie, like the theme they're kind of going for is like,
Oh, and then he
um,
relives like the same day, and then he stops using it, right?
yeah.
I've seen this.
So that's a little spoiler there.
Oh.
But, yeah. Yeah, don't watch the trailer for that movie because it gives away everything.
Like I
But
just did.
yeah, essentially, like the theme they're going for is like the concept of amor fati, or like love of fate, of like loving. Like if you had to relive the same life over and over again, would you want to, like, trying to live your life in that way to like appreciate every moment? It just hits really different after you've watched that whole movie and like watch this guy go through that thing, versus if I just explained to you like, oh, you should have amor fati and live your life that way.
Right.
If I just told someone that randomly, then they'd be like, "What are you talking about?" But like, if you watch this movie and see this guy go through that and come to that realization, then the theme hits so much harder. And you're like, "Oh crap!" I was like tearing up at the end of that movie. It's so great. Yeah.
Oh yeah, I love that movie. Yeah, that's sort of just like how storytelling really transmits ideas a lot better than just facts in a lot of ways.
Yeah, exactly. And like, I think that's why film is used as propaganda too. Like,
Yeah,
yeah.
can be misused or
Mhm.
used for certain ends, definitely. All right. Well, thank you so much, Jakin, for coming to talk to us. I highly recommend you guys check out. We'll have links in the bottom. There's an Instagram to the new show you're working on, to Die For, as well as your YouTube, which has some really interesting video essays. I highly recommend them. I enjoyed them for sure. Would you like to plug anything in specific?
Yeah, just those things. Yeah, you can follow along with the progress of To Die For on Instagram. Also on TikTok, I think it's To Die For Show on TikTok, or To Die For TSTV. Yeah, definitely check out my YouTube channel. Yeah, To Die For will be premiering in May in person. I'm not sure when I'll be able to release it online because we're submitting to festivals and stuff like that.
Mhm.
And like sometimes festivals don't want you to release it beforehand, but like definitely check for updates there. And I don't know when I'll release my next video essay because I'm busy with this stuff. But I think
Right.
I'll make a video essay detailing like how I made To Die For, but I have to make To Die For first.
Yeah.
Right.
But I'm sure I'll have some time after that. Yeah.
Very cool.
Good content.
Yeah. Thank you for having me on here.
Yeah.
Yeah, no
Thank you so
problem.
much.
It's a fun conversation.
All right. Let us know what you guys thought. If you have any questions, comments, feel free to leave them. All the links to everything will be in the description. Thank you guys for watching, and we'll see you next time.
Yep. Until next time.